Welcome to the Revelation of Hope podcast with your host, Alvin Bonds II. Join us each week as Alvin explores the relationship between leadership and families by interviewing leaders in different fields all over the world. Alvin believes that the success of tomorrow's leaders begins with the success of today's families.
Hello, and welcome to the Revelation of Hope podcast. I am your host, Alvin Bonds II, and this is episode 6. Today, I interview Stacy Miller. Stacy is the Regional Program Manager of the Tennessee Correctional Services, West Tennessee region. I caution you in listening to today's podcast. I'm going to briefly discuss trauma and adverse childhood experiences. And so this may be a trigger for someone who may have experienced trauma. If you are triggered by anything mentioned in today's podcast, I encourage you to reach out to your local community health center, reach out to a counselor, a therapist, social worker, reach out to someone and get help. If you're having thoughts of harming yourself or of suicide, I encourage you to contact the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. That number is 1-800-273-8255 or 1-800-273-TALK. Someone is available 24/7 to answer your call and to help you with resources. We'll get to my interview with Stacy shortly, but I'd like to talk to you a bit about adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. There's been lots of research and lots of talk about adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences have been linked to risky health behaviors, chronic health conditions, low life potential, and even early death. As a counselor, I work with children and adults who have overcome or are overcoming adverse childhood experiences. Here in Tennessee, the State Department has created an initiative to prevent adverse childhood experiences. I'm actually a trainer of the ACEs program. When we look at adverse childhood experiences, we look at the family. We look at the situation that children are brought up in. And we look at stress. And there are different types of stress. There's positive stress, a new baby, a new job, starting school sometimes can be positive stress. Then we look at tolerable stress. These are tragic, unavoidable events like a natural disaster, a flood, a hurricane, even a death in the family. And then the third type of stress we look at is toxic stress. When we think about toxic stress on a family, we look at abuse or neglect, parent addiction, mental illness, untreated. All of these factors influence a child's development. And if you have a fractured development of a child from early childhood, even the bond or connection between a child and his or her parents, that creates distress in a child. And when you have that child that grows up to be an adult and those issues aren't resolved or worked through, what happens is an epidemic. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, it looks at 3 different areas. It looks at abuse, which is physical, emotional, or sexual. We look at neglect, which is also physical or emotional. And then we look at household dysfunction. This could be mental illness. It could be a relative who's incarcerated. It could be the mother was treated violently, substance abuse, or even divorce. All of these have an adverse effect on a child's development. It's important that we look at ACEs for our children and youth in their development, but we also have to look at ACEs and their effect or influence on adults. Imagine a 40-year-old male or female that never addressed their sexual abuse when they were a child. or even the parents of that child ignored it or didn't even know it was happening, or maybe the perpetrator. That adult may have some struggles in their lives. And if you know anyone who's experienced trauma, or you may have experienced trauma yourself, you may be able to attest to some of the struggles that these individuals have. I'd like to read a poem to you. The title is A Bonus, and it is written by Elizabeth Smart. That day I finished a small piece for an obscure magazine. I popped it in the box, and such a starry elation came over me that I got whistled at in the street for the first time in a long time. I was dirty and roughly dressed and had circles under my eyes, and far, far from flirtation, but so full of completion of a deed duly done, an act of consummation, that the freedom and force it engendered shone and spun out of my old raincoat. It must have looked like love or a fabulous free holiday to the young men sauntering down Berwick Street. I still think this is most mysterious, for while I was writing it, I was gritty. It felt like self-abuse, constipation, desperately unsocial. But done, done, done. Everything in the world flowed back like a huge bonus. When you get a chance, look up the Elizabeth Smart story. And if you're not familiar with it, Elizabeth discusses her abduction when she was a child and how she survived 9 months with her captors. Elizabeth has gone on to become an activist for children everywhere, for safety and protection and education, and empowering people to speak up and to reach out. Elizabeth's story is one of millions, if not billions, across the world. Many people don't show on the outside their trauma. A burn victim, you would probably notice their scars. Someone who lost a limb, you may know their scars. Someone who was emotionally abused, you may not readily recognize their scars. Someone who was physically abused, you may or may not see their scars. Someone who was sexually abused, you may not see it. Just because you don't see it, just because you don't see their scars, does not mean that they're there. They're there. And one of the things that Stacy encourages in her interview, for anyone who has experienced trauma or any adverse childhood experience, to reach out and to seek help. Help is available. I'm very thankful to have Stacy today for this interview. Well, thank you, Stacy, so much for joining us. Tell us what you do.
I am the Regional Program Manager for Tennessee Correctional Services. It is a private probation company that provides offender services and intervention services to misdemeanor defendants in the city of Jackson and Madison County.
Okay. And how long have you been doing this?
I started this company for the owner 15 years ago. And as of July 1 of this year, I will officially be the owner of Tennessee Correctional Services West.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That's pretty big. How did that promotion happen?
Well, 15 years ago, there was a company here in Jackson City Court that was providing services, and Judge Blake Anderson wanted to take his vision and his mission for his court system in a new direction. And with that, he knew a young man that he had done business with in the past in that probation company, and he had branched out on his own to start his new own company. And Judge Anderson went with him because he liked his vision and this mission and, you know, what he was standing for when it came to reducing mass incarceration, institutionalization, and really becoming program focused. With that being said, he said, hey, I'll go with him, but I want Stacy to be the one that runs it. And so 15 years ago, ago, I got thrown in as a young, inexperienced kid and said, here, start this company and go with it. So 15 years later, I have built the company into something I'm really proud of. All of our programs are state renowned. They're some of the only programs in the state providing the type of services that we provide. And when my boss decided he wanted to retire, I decided to go out on my own and buy the company. So.
Well, that is phenomenal. Congratulations to you for having a proven track record, obviously, 15 years, and to be selected to lead a organization, that's pretty phenomenal. I imagine over 15 years you've developed I guess, your leadership plan or philosophy. Would you share with us what your leadership philosophy is?
It's very simple. I never claim to know it all. I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I make my networking and my contacts the biggest part of what I do. Everything that I do, I wouldn't be able to do on my own if I didn't have strong contacts and strong colleagues. Networking is where it's at. It's being able to call on companies that work with my counterparts or agencies that provide similar resources or that have similar needs or objectives, and being able to partner with them, giving those opportunities to my sister companies is what's also helped me grow what we've done here, is by relying on other agencies, other professionals such as yourself, to be able to call up in a time of crisis and say, hey, I have this client that needs some help. Can you provide services to them? Is there something that you have that I can lean on? Realizing that nobody can do it alone and that it takes a village, I have really utilized my village to the extreme, and I think that's what's made us as successful as we have been.
And I can personally relate to or appreciate your ability to connect. And you've picked up the phone and called me or texted me, and with resources or connections, and I definitely can see that's definitely a strength that you have. And how did that become such an important part of your day, of your leadership, networking and connections?
When I first started this business, I didn't quite know what direction I needed to take it in. I didn't quite have a lot of the knowledge and expertise and wisdom that I needed. So being able to rely on the Business Professional Women's Organization was very instrumental. But getting, like I said, in contact with some of those individuals that I looked up to as mentors, leaning on them, looking for advice, not being afraid to reach out and ask. As I grew that network and that village, I think what happened was more people began to join. And as more people joined that village, I found myself no longer the young one in the group. I found myself as more experienced and more seasoned, and I was able to bring younger people up underneath me. I was able to groom and empower them through the office and through other opportunities I had. And I think I just morphed into more of a leader rather than being elected as one or appointed as one. It was somewhat of a, I guess what you would say, transformation. It was slow, and I still have lots to learn. I've never professed again to know it all, but it is something that, every day I'm looking at ways to be better. My leadership, I look at it from a standpoint that to make me a good leader, I never need to ask anyone to do something that I wouldn't be willing to do myself. So here you're going to see me, dumping the trash if I need to, or vacuuming, or cleaning the bathrooms, or, seeing clients, whatever it may be. If it needs to be done around here, I'm willing to chip in and put my hands in too. And that's definitely, I think, made for a strong working environment that we have here. We operate more like a family than we do a business.
Yeah. And just in my interactions with some of the staff in your office, there's a cohesiveness. Everyone just seems to connect together, and there's a level of respect that they have for you. And that's something that I don't always see in different agencies and organizations. So that's definitely something you've created and fostered at your organization. I'm curious, is there any particular person that has been instrumental in helping guide your developing leadership philosophy?
for about 18 years. He is program focused. He is community focused. And he really wants to give that person the opportunity to take their life where they've been and transform it into where they could have a place where they deserve to be. And growing up, and I say growing up even though I started to work for him as an adult, I had lots of growing still to do. And growing up under him, his vision and his mentoring has been absolutely phenomenal for my caring ability and my compassion. He's done so much for me as far as, helping me look beyond the person's exterior or their current situation, and he has groomed me to look at their backstory and to look at how that person got where they're at, what led them to that, and what you can do to take them to a place that's going to make them a more happier, productive individual in society. So I definitely got to give great kudos to Judge Anderson because, he's amazing.
Yeah.
And then the other would be my family. I have two remarkable children that have always put me on a pedestal and have thought higher than me than I've thought of myself. And just what they thought of me has always made me want to live up to what they see in me and what they've always desired for me to be. And so having, Anna and Griffin in my corner and them just being champion for me has been absolutely instrumental and me always trying to do my best and be the best at what I can be.
Yeah, and I think you have one that's left the nest and maybe one that's, almost ready to to fly out. That's pretty phenomenal. How have you been able to find balance between your individual career aspirations and raising your family?
It's not always been easy, and we haven't always been able to do it. You always hear people talk about the bumps in the roads. Well,
Right.
I mean, hey, we've managed to carry on even when the road got washed out. It wasn't just a few bumps; there wasn't a road there anymore. We've had to hoof it up mountains and through molehills and down rivers and through caves, to survive. And again, that kind of comes into where I've relied on my village. And, I can't say how many times I've made the joke, okay, Alvin and Simon, Simon and Theodore, don't let me tell Alvin what y'all are up to today. Just because, like I said, you were part of that, village. And, I mean, I couldn't thank my village enough. I couldn't thank, you enough for all that you've done for me and my family. And it's the encouragement and the empowerment that we give to one another that really helps each other succeed. It's been very difficult. Of course, I've got two overachieving children that have been involved in everything under the sun. And I wanted to be the mom that I needed to be for them. And it's a hard balance to decide which one comes first. And, of course, your children do come first.
Yeah.
Luckily, again, the environment that we fostered here has been one based on family, necessarily on the corporate model. So I want my family to come first, and for my family to come first, that means I have to put somebody else's family that works here first as well. So where I might have one that's calling, touring a college next week, and I need to be off for that, somebody else might have a 2-year-old with a cold that he needs to be off for. And so we just rotate covering for one another. And we realize that everybody's family means something. It's important not to just, the individual, but to us as a company. And I think the way that we fostered family and unity, I think that is what's made our company as successful as it has. I definitely could not do it alone without the team that we've got. That's what's definitely made what we have some of the best in the state.
Yeah, and Stacy, you've known me for a while, and the work that I do as a mental health professional, and I also imagine in your field as well, you see how important family is. Working in corrections, I imagine you see pretty much a lot of it all. And for me personally, I believe that the success of tomorrow's leaders begins with the success of today's families. What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree. Running a probation company or a program where you see people involved in the justice system, one of the things that you have to do is you have to delve deeper into what's going on in that individual's life. You have to find out what brought them there, what their backstory is. And so much of that backstory involves trauma. So much of that backstory involves abuse. poverty, lack of education, lack of resources, low self-worth, no self-esteem, just all around hurt to some individuals. And, that's the core of what so much of our society's downfall is based upon. Everybody's got a backpage. Everybody's got a story. And that story either makes you or breaks you. And that story, whether it makes you or breaks you, is going to be dependent upon who's there in your corner and who has brought you out of that dark space and who's encouraged you or mentored to you. If you do any of the research on the ACEs theory, the adverse child effects, you find out that there's many of us that have some type of trauma in our past. We have some type of hurt, some type of agony. However, we were able to overcome that with people in our lives that brought us through that adversity, who took us in, who mentored to us, who made our day better, whether it was a teacher, a guidance counselor, a pastor, a Sunday school teacher, a neighbor, a friend's parent, a friend. There's always somebody, excuse me, that has the ability, when you cross the path of someone else, to make their day better. And I think that's just one of the things that's so imperative that we do today, is we try to plug ourselves back into humanity. We've gotten so tied up in our social media and our cell phones that we can do everything with a couple clicks of our thumbs, that we're not plugging into society anymore. We're not plugging into the humanity part of society. And we really got to get back in touch with people that are around us. We've got to find out what's going on in their lives and what we can do to uplift them, empower them, encourage them. And by having that ability to build up someone else and to making their life better, you're going to find yourself more fulfilled.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned about the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and many of us have trauma in our past, from physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, abandonment. It goes on. And it sometimes can feel like a huge weight, and it almost can feel like there's no way possible to come out or to even function or even succeed. What would you say to someone who's experienced trauma in their life? What would you say that would encourage them to believe that they can achieve?
Well, I don't know how much time I have, so I'll try to make this as quickly as possible, because this is something that I talk about on a daily basis. When somebody's experienced trauma, the number one thing they're going to ask themselves is, why me? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to God's people? Why do things happen to people at all? If me and you were standing by a box, and the box weighed 50 pounds, could I lift that box up? Probably not. But if I asked you to pick that box up, could you lift that box up? Probably so. What is the difference between you being able to pick up the box and me being able to pick up the box, since we're of similar size? Part of it is the fact that your whole life, because of your masculinity, because of your gender, everybody's been asking you to pick up boxes for them. They knew that Alvin could pick up the box. Alvin, would you put this here? Alvin, would you move this here? Alvin, would you help this? And it was something that you conditioned yourself to do. Did you start out lifting 50-pound boxes? Of course not. You started out much younger, picking up 10-pound boxes and 20-pound boxes, until lifting a 50-pound box wasn't difficult for you at all. I, on the other hand, had people pick the boxes up for me, whether it was my gender, my size, my strength level. I had a lot of people pick boxes up for me because they could pick it up and I couldn't. I think that's one of the reasons why God grooms us the way that He does. He gives each one of us talents. He gives each one of us callings. And He knows what we're going to be able to lift when the box is before us. Sometimes God puts things on us or allows things to happen or stands back and sees things happen to us, but still knows we're going to be strong enough to carry that box. We're going to not only be able to pick it up, but we're going to be able to carry it. I used to wonder through some of my trauma, and you know what some of my trauma has been, and some of the things that I've been through, and I used to wonder why, some of these things, just for one thing to happen to you is bad enough, but for me to have 3, 4, 5 of those incidences, all to happen to one person, it really got in my spirit on why are these things happening to me. 15 years later, sitting in my office, watching clients come in and out on a Tuesday, and every one of them has had similar experiences that I have had. Every one of them's experienced similar trauma and have had something similar happen to them that I have had. Fortunately, because of my experience, because of my knowledge, and because I lifted that box and I carried that box, it gave me a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom that I was able to share with others. My answer to them when they ask me, why is this happening to me, is just the simple fact that they were the ones strong enough to be able to do it. They were the one that was entrusted with carrying the burden, and knowing that by carrying that burden, they were going to carry that box somewhere that was going to help somebody when they were in the same situation. So I have just absolute admiration for anyone who has experienced trauma and continues to forge forward, who continues to get up every day, put their shoes and socks on, or flip-flops, or whatever suits their feet, and continues to find meaning in their life, continues to try to find purpose, even on days where they can't lift the box or the box doesn't want to move. They're still trying to lift it. They're still trying to carry it. They're still forging on. I have so much admiration for somebody who really works to overcome trauma, and especially those that work towards helping others with their trauma. I think, again, it's that contact with humanity that we stopped making for a while, and we've definitely got to renew our passion and get fired up about that again, because when we can help others through their situation, it really brings back a whole retrospect on how important it was for us to put others in first place.
And Stacy, that's precisely the reason that I'm doing this podcast is you and I see daily the struggles that our families are going through, whether it's, a mother or father that is in jail, whether it's a mother or father that is absent, and the child is left, whether through abuse, through neglect, through foster care. It goes on. And a lot of our people don't know how to rise above. And I appreciate you just encouraging anyone that's experienced trauma or an adverse childhood experience, that giving them hope, that there is hope, that they don't have to stay in the place that they were. And, you're a living testimony. So that's amazing. Anything else you'd like to share?
Absolutely. Alvin, I thank you so much. You have been absolutely instrumental for so many of my clients that have been in turmoil and have really experienced trauma. And that trauma has led everything from them to being on the verge of going back to jail, to serving long sentences, to them choosing not to end their own life.
Yeah.
From one extreme to another, and it has been absolutely a blessing and an honor to call you my friend and my colleague and part of my village. I tell everybody when I make a referral to you that I'm not just making a blanket referral. I wouldn't just send you to anybody unless I knew for a fact that who I was making a referral to was going to be top-notch and was really going to better them and help them out of the situation that they were in. And I'm very open and very honest that, not only did you save my life, but you saved my baby's life too. And, I think that's just one of the things that we've got to continue to realize is that there is always hope out there, and that there is a village of people that, do have care and do have compassion. And that might be difficult to find them in the beginning from wherever you're at. However, if it's hard enough for you to find somebody in your life that, when you need somebody, that, hey, call me. I'll put you in touch with somebody. I'm there for you. You're there for them. And I really feel like, again, we just got to continue to reach out to humanity. We've got to stop getting so caught up in policies and procedures and the way things have always been, and and such did it this way, so that's the way it's still got to be done that way. We've really got to come back to the grassroots of things, sit down, look at what we're trying to do in our businesses, in our homes, in our organizations, in our schools. We've really got to get back to the grassroots of things and find out what we intended for these institutions. What did we intend, organizations to be, to become, and who were we trying to help? What kind of change were we trying to make? And have we made that change that was originally intended, or have we gotten stagnant and stale? And if you've gotten stagnant and stale and you're not seeing change and you're not seeing the positive outcome, it's time to change things up. It's time to shake things up. It's time to get new ways of doing things in there. And it's time to really start focusing on lifting people up again, empowering people, working through some of these things that people have experienced as children and adults, and letting them know that, hey, they are viable, important parts of our community, and we need their input, and we need their knowledge and their wisdom and their experience. And we just need everybody to be encouraged enough to know that there's a box out there for them to pick up and for them to carry, no matter how much it weighs or doesn't.
And that's powerful. And I just appreciate you sharing that with us. And the story of the boxes, I think that's so profound. And I think that's something that each of us can take and look at and recognize. We don't always have to be the only person lifting. We can reach out, we can get help. And so I just appreciate you taking the time for me to interview for this podcast, Stacy.
Absolutely. Anytime you need me, I'm here.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, as well as providing a rating and review. Every week, I will interview a different leader and invite them to share with us their views and perspective on the relationship between leadership and family. Be sure to visit my website. It's www.alvinbonds2nd.com. That's ALVINBONDSII.com. Have a great day.